Okay, so here we should be good to go. And okay, so while I start here, make sure that I see the rest. Okay. Okay, so this should be fine here. All right, so everybody can hear me and hopefully you can see the PowerPoint. Is it clear there? I cannot see the screens all the way down. Is the PowerPoint showing up?
Yes.
Oh, okay, great. All right. So just to clarify a few things about the exam. So you are having it on Wednesday. Most likely, I will not be able to join on Zoom because I will be at the airport going through some more bureaucracy and local nightmare and international nightmare. But hopefully, I will make it home by Thursday. So Ray is going to be in the class. Ray is going to have the versions of the exam. You have to bring your Scantrons. Make sure you bring a pencil and eraser, and you bring some form of ID so they can know that you are who you are. Right. So Ray is going to have the proctors around the class, and make sure that you know how you fill out your Scantron. Okay, make sure you do it in advance before you get to the test so you can actually use your time at the test to answer the questions. And you are going to have 50 questions on this test. And I have a slide here on this PowerPoint that I just uploaded. Also, I uploaded a PDF to your modules. You have not the entire PowerPoint is going to be on the test. So you have up to glance that is going to be included in the test, and then not more than that. And I did put an announcement in relation to your assignments in a Pearson, in MyLab and Mastering. I have changed the deadlines for the part 2 for chapter 4 and as well as chapter 5 because we did not get to cover them yet. So those, of course, are not going to be in your exam on Wednesday. So I changed the deadline so you don't panic. Okay. Yeah, if I did not answer your emails, it's just because I got way too many emails about those assignments, and I already put in the announcement. So do you have any questions about that or about the test? But it's cool. Hope.
Yep, I think we're good.
Okay, so here we go for this part that that's going to be on the test. Let's start here. So we stopped last time talking about those different layers, types of cells, and how you classify them. Okay. Okay, so this this PowerPoint saved with an automatic highlighter or this laser thing that is going on its own here. So that's going to drive me insane. I'm just going to try to use the highlighter so to emphasize the points that I need to pay attention to. Hopefully, I'll be able to see you on the corner here if anybody has questions. Okay. All right, so this type of cells that we have not seen before, okay, is called pseudo-stratified columnar cell. Okay, so what does that mean? Remember that you have the type of classification that was either simple or stratified, right? So the simple has only one layer of cell, and then the stratified has more than one layer of cells. And then remember how you classify those cells. If you are looking at a simple layer, so whatever cells those are, that's the classification. But if you're looking at multiple layers, then you have to look at the cell that is on the apical surface. That is going to determine how you classify the stratified layer. Okay. And then you look at something like this, and it looks kind of weird. It looks like there are more than one layer, right? So you see here and say, well, this cell over here, it looks like it's making another layer, and this one seems to be on top of it. But actually, what is happening here is that you have one layer of cells, and this cell here at the bottom, let me see if I can use the laser pointer here. This cell here at the bottom actually has a cytoplasm that is stretching all the way to the top here. So you don't really see this part of the cell cytoplasm because it's very tiny between the other two cells, but it is there. So, and the same is happening with this cell here. It seems like it's making another layer, but it's not. It's only one cell, and then the cytoplasm is going all the way up there, but you just can't see it. So this is what you call pseudo-stratified. Pseudo is for false, right? So it's not stratified, it's one single layer, but it looks like it's more than one layer. Okay, so this is called pseudo-stratified layer. And then where do you find these types of cells? Well, we know that you can find them in the upper respiratory tract, okay, mainly in your trachea, okay, so upper respiratory tracts. And also you're going to find it in ducts of large glands, okay, so large glands, upper respiratory tract, and in tubules in the testes, right? So male reproductive system, okay? Keep in mind that this type of cells at the apical surface, they tend to be ciliated, okay? So they have cilia to move in case of your trachea. You're going to move mucus around, okay, in order to expel it from the respiratory system, okay? So let me see here, if I had told you everything you have to know here. All right. And how you gonna realize that this is pseudostratified? Let me see, intracellular tissue. Okay, let me see here, I have another slide for that. All right, so these guys here are your pseudo-stratified type of tissue. And you see here also that you have the main cells that are involved here, those are columnar cells. All right, so when you talk about pseudostratified, you're really talking about columnar cells. And let's see. Okay. So these are your pseudostratified. And then you have another type of arrangement here that I had not mentioned before either. And these are different from your pseudostratified. These are called transitional. Okay, so transitional epithelial cells. Now, how you differentiate them? Well, for the pseudostratified, you have cells that look like they are on top of each other, right? So there's like cells that are on top of each other like this. But you know that all of them are columnar cells, although some of them are kind of looking weird and they're kind of looking like cuboidal cells, but you're not going to find any squamous cells here. And remember, one telltale sign of identifying cell shape, you have to look at the shape of the nucleus. Because, for example, here, you might think that this guy is cuboidal, but the nucleus does not look perfectly round, although you might argue that this one does look perfectly round. This guys here, the nucleus should look a bit elongated, okay? Yeah, this is not a good picture. This is looking perfectly round. But overall, you should have elongated nuclei, okay, to find columnar cells. And of course, if I put some picture on the exam, I'm not going to give you something that's going to, be confusing. It's going to be something really clear. Okay. Now, in the case of transitional epithelial, what you're going to see is that sometimes the cells look like they are cuboidal. Okay. So you're going to have here like cuboidal cells. So let me find the cuboidal cells. And then you look at them in another situation, and the cells are going to look stratified. And you're going to say, wait a minute, but I thought they were columnar cells. I thought they were cuboidal cells. And then depending on the situation, they look like they are squamous cells. And then you're gonna say, oh, it must be because those cells can't make up their mind. Sometimes they look like cuboidal, and some other times they look like squamous. Well, thank goodness there are only a few places that you're going to find confused cells like those. That is called them transitional cells. And that's going to be when you look at cells that are lining the ureters, okay, ureters that come from kidney, they go to the bladder, and especially you want to find them in the bladder. So lining the bladder, the urinary bladder, okay? And also you're going to find some also in the urethra. But then you think about it, the cells that are lining the bladder, okay, they they're going to assume different shapes. So when the bladder is empty, then you don't need so much volume. You know, the bladder is empty. You don't have much to hold in there. So the cells kind of relax and they assume this type of cuboidal shape. Now, when your bladder fills up with urine, you're gonna have to hold a lot of volume inside of the bladder. So those cells stretch out in order to accommodate the increased volume. And that's when they would look like squamous cells, right? So you're going to call them, what are they? Are they cuboidal or are they squamous cells? Well, you call them transitional. So this is a transitional epithelial cells. And this specialized type of cell is very important for a couple of reasons. First is that, of course, they have to change their shape to accommodate how much liquid is there, right? Especially how much liquid is in the bladder. And also, they have to have some impermeable coating that is going to be present here at the epithelial side. Okay, so this is a coating. And this type of coating has a specialized fibers or specialized proteins in there. In this case, the protein is called uroplakin. Okay. And that's going to give a protective layer and an impermeable layer to that inside of your bladder. Okay. And of course, why do you need an impermeable layer? Well, you don't want the contents of the bladder, like your urine, to be leaking out of the bladder and getting into the interstitial fluid or getting absorbed, into the blood or back into your circulation. That's not a good idea. So you need to have this protective coat on the inside of the bladder. All right. So here is the story with this transitional epithelial cells. So get ready now because we're going to get to your first question. And here is your first question. Sorry, before we start, let's just go over the question here. All right, so let's think about this. Which characteristic of epithelial tissues would you expect to find in a duct that is subject to a high degree of pressure? So this is saying, such as the male urethra, but you can also think about high degree of pressure. It could be your skin, for example. Okay, so you don't get confused here because I just mentioned the urethra with another type of cells, although that other cell is not present here. All right, so let's think about the answers. You have cuboidal shape, simple layer, or pseudo-stratified or stratified layering. So let's start the iClicker. Let's get your answers in.
All right, starting now. $20 seconds. $10 seconds. 3, 2, 1. All right, what is the correct answer? D, they are saying.
Yes, stratified layering. All right. So this is quite a simple question saying that if you need if the tissue is going through a lot of stress, you cannot just have one layer, otherwise the tissue will break. So everybody got D? Do we have? I don't see the answers for. Do we have any other answers, Ray?
Yeah, some people, 9% answered A and 19% answered C.
Oh, okay. So here for A, cuboidal shape, that has to do with glands. Okay. Glands and filtering, but mainly glands. And C is pseudostratified layering. That has to do with absorption and with the respiratory tract. Okay, so respiratory tract, you're going to have one layer of pseudostratified. But when you look at places that undergo a lot of pressure or they have to deal with a lot of stress, you have to have more than one layer. Otherwise, that layer will give out. Right? So it has to be something that will withstand pressure and not break. So it has to be a stratified type of tissue. Mhm. All right, so here we get to a fun one that is the gland. Okay, so looking at glandular epithelium. So what is a gland? It's something that is going to produce some molecule and is going to dump it somewhere. Okay. In this case, it has two places where you can dump the products of the cell. It can be either inside the body or in your blood, or it can be to the outside. Okay, so you have glands that are going to be either secreting things to the outside, like sweat glands. So those are exocrine glands, or you have glands that are going to dump things on like in your blood. So those are going to be your endocrine glands. So I'm going to see how to distinguish those two types of glands, right? So internally secreting, those are endocrine. And when you look at those types of glands, first thing that you're going to notice is that those internal secreting glands, they do not have tubes. So there are no ducts there that allow for the product to be delivered at a certain place, okay? And then when you look at this other type of glands, the exocrine glands, those are going to have ducts. Then example here is sweat gland. Okay. Let me see here. All right, so you have glands that are made up of many cells. So those are going to be multicellular. And you also have glands that are going to be just one cell. So you have example here of one cell gland that is as a goblet cell that you're going to find like in the intestine or a respiratory tract. Okay, so either unicellular or multicellular. Most glands are multicellular, but then in case of goblet cells, those are considered unicellular. I'm going to see more pictures and examples of those. Okay. So here, looking at overall picture of these glands. So what happens here? You have the origin of the gland. They're all going to be from epithelial tissue, from epithelial origin. So what happens is that you end up with an invagination of that epithelial layer. Okay, so this is what is showing here. The thing dips, and after it dips, you're gonna have differentiation of those cells, and you're gonna have this formation of the duct. Okay, so if you have the duct and you have these specialized cells that are producing something, so this is your example of exocrine gland. Okay, so both exocrine and endocrine, they start up the same way, is invagination of your epithelial tissue, this epithelial sheath, okay? So now when you look here in the case of your endocrine gland, you see that they originated the same way, but the duct disappeared. Those cells underwent apoptosis. They disappeared. They died out. Okay? So these cells here that are making up this endocrine gland, they have the same origin, the same epithelial origin, which is the ectoderm, right? The same origin as the other cells here, or this other gland here. But the difference here is that they're not connected to this ectoderm anymore. They are now inside of the body without a duct that would connect to the outside, but they came from the same embryonic origin, right? So here's an example of gland that will release hormones. And as you see, this type of glands, they are very vascular, because the blood that goes through this or goes near the gland, the blood has to pick up this hormone that was liberated by the gland. Okay? So this gland will dump the product in the interstitial fluid, and that is going to be picked up by the blood, by the circulation. So here, here is showing examples of endocrine glands, and mainly endocrine glands secrete hormones, and that's the whole definition of this endocrine messaging. These things drive me crazy. I don't know how to stop the automatic shifting. So pause here. Okay. So here you see that you have a gland that is in one place, and then you're going to have targets for the hormones produced by the gland, that those targets are going to be like somewhere else. Okay. So we have several glands that are part of this endocrine system. Okay, so here are some important glands, like your hypothalamus. Okay, so hypothalamus is going to produce a lot of very important hormones, right? And it's going to go to the pituitary gland, and the pituitary gland is going to dump it in the blood. Okay, so besides your hypothalamus and pituitary gland, you have here your thyroid and parathyroid glands. Okay, and other examples of gland here, your adrenal glands on top of your kidneys. Okay, and let me see, and of course your sex-related type of glands. So you have ovaries and testes. So those are going to produce some type of hormones that are going to be dumped in the circulation and reach target organs that are far away from the site of production. And of course, our very important endocrine organ here, your pancreas. And of course, I was going to see later, the pancreas has two functions. It has exocrine and endocrine function, right? So in case of your endocrine function, you'll be looking at specialized cells in the pancreas that that do not have that the duct type of formation. Right. And here is another question for you. Just looking at this gland, you should tell me, well, this is only 50% of chance for you to get it right, right? So what kind of gland is that? Let's start the eye clicker, and this is really, really easy.
20 seconds. 10 seconds. 3. All right, what is the answer? Exocrine, A.
Yes, it's exocrine. Why? Because you have a duct. And here's your duct right there. So this thing has to be exocrine gland. Okay. So here we see your unicellular exocrine gland. In this case, you see this is a goblet cell. Okay. And this is kind of interesting, because here you're not seeing the duct, but then you're not seeing the entire picture, because this type of gland is going to be placed in a space that is actually, let me see, I'll draw here. So you look at your intestines, and you're going to find that you have this indentation here, and then those goblet cells are going to be like on the side here. So you end up with some duct that goes to the outside here, the apical surface of those glands. Okay, so here would be your gland, like right there. Again, this thing is jumping around. Sorry about that. Okay, so this goblet cell, if you look at properties of this cell, those are quite interesting. So you have here a cell that has a lot of rough ER and has a lot of membranes like close to the rough ER, and those membranes go into Golgi and they make a lot of these secretory vesicles. So it's packed with secretory vesicles. When you look at the nucleus, you're going to see that the nucleus is far away from your apical surface. Okay. So you see here, the cell is specialized in producing a lot of things that have to be exocytosed. Okay. And here, when you look at the apical surface of those of the tissue where the cells are housed, you see that they tend to have a lot of microvilli. Okay, so this is part of either your digestive tract or your intestine, or is part of your respiratory tract. It has the microvilli and cilia, okay, that is going to help to push things around. And the job of these cells is to produce mucin. So mucin is part of the mucus that is going to be deposited in this apical surface of those cells. So this is your very cool unicellular gland. And then we go through this multicellular type of arrangement. So this sometimes has to be a bit confusing, but we're going to make it really, really simple, right? So what you have to know about these types of multicellular exocrine glands? First of all, these are all exocrine glands because you have tubes, you have ducts in all of them. Okay, so everything here is exocrine, like you told me before. All right, so let's look at simple organizations first, and then you go to more complex or compound organizations. So when you look at this first picture right here, okay, first thing, there is a duct, yeah, is exocrine. And now you see, does this thing look like a lollipop or does it look like a hairpin? Well, it looks like a hairpin. All right, so well, first thing you have to see, there are a lot of cells that make up this gland, so absolutely multicellular. So this thing looks like a hairpin, and it has only one duct. So now you say, oh, so this is a simple gland that looks like a hairpin or like just one little tube. So you call that simple tubular gland. So that was quite simple. Now, if instead of looking like a little tube, if this thing would look like a little berry here, like a little raspberry here at the bottom, you can say, oh, it looks like a little alveolus here. Like when you look at the lungs, at the functional units of the lungs, those are called alveoli. So this thing is round. It looks like a little berry or a little alveolus, and it has only one duct. So we call this simple alveolar gland. So that's simple enough, right? Simple tubular or simple alveolar. That's good. So now let's look at this other situation here. You have your tube, and then you don't have just one little tube like we see here. What we see here is kind of like a chicken foot. Okay, so you have these little tubes that are connected directly to your one tube that is to the outside. Okay, so you don't have branching of this tube here. When it goes to branching, it's already like at the glandular place, at the cells that are producing the material to be taken to the outside. So this you call simple branched tubular type of gland. Okay, because these things don't look like lollipops, so they're tubes. Tubular, simple because they are connected to one tube that goes outside, but it's not only one tube, so it is branched. So if it looks like a chicken foot, you call this simple branch tubular type of cell. Now, if you compare it, if instead of looking like a tube, if this thing looks like a berry, so you're going to call it simple branched, but this is alveolar instead of tubular. So that should be quite simple, quite easy to recognize. Okay. And now let's look at this other type of arrangement here, in which you have a compound type of ducts. So now you see this duct that goes to the outside. Now the duct itself is branching. Okay, so you don't have the gland right there at the duct. You have the duct branching, and then the branch duct is going to further branch, okay? Or it could not further branch, but you could have further branching. So the main idea here, the gland is not in the first branch. You have further branching out of the original, of the first tube here. So this here, in general, you call compound tubular. And then you have to look at the shape of the gland. So is it going to be here? Is going to be a little tube, or is it going to be a berry? So this is compound tubular because those glands are little tubes. Then you go here and you say, oh, these are little berries. So this is compound alveolar. Okay. And we're going to stay with the simple versions of those because you can even see types of glands that have tubes and berries. So those are compound tubular alveolar. It gets, more names to the description. But I would not ask you something like this because it's kind of difficult to visualize. So is it going to be tubes or is it going to be berries? Does it have one tube or is it branched tubes? Okay, so you should be able to identify what type of gland that is. Okay, and now we have to see what kind of cells are going to be present in different types of glands. So before I go to the next description, is everybody clear with this type of classification? Do we have questions on this type of classification?
We're getting nods. Oh, we got a question.
Question?
Are they going to have to be able to differentiate between them?
You're going to have to
Lot of those.
differentiate the ones that I mentioned here. Yes. So what do you need to know? So the question is, what do you need to know, right? You need to know if you have only one tube, that's simple. If you have one tube that branches, so yeah, simple branched. Is it a tube or is it a berry? You gotta know that. Is it one tube that branches? So then it's not simple, that is compound. You have to know, yeah, these basic things that I mentioned here. All right, now we go for fun descriptions of how you get the products out of these cells that are producing them, right? So you have three types of delivery of the product, right? So the first one, just went down here. So the first type of cell that produces stuff for the glands is called merocrine, okay? So this is the most common type that you find in glands. And where you find merocrine glands, you're going to find them like in sweat glands and also in your exocrine pancreas, you're going to find merocrine glands, right? So those are types of glands. These are all exocrine type of glands, okay? So what happens here with the merocrine glands? These cells are going to produce a lot of vesicles, and those vesicles are going to undergo exocytosis, and then the secretions are going to be dumped on the outside of the apical surface, right? So most common type is your merocrine gland. And you can imagine the cell is just producing exocytosing, producing exocytosing. The cell is like, it's not really suffering any major pain. So it's producing and dumping it out. All right. Most common type of gland. And then you have this other type that is called holocrine. Okay, this is the dramatic one. So what happens here? The cell produces that product, produces, and then it fills up with the vesicles for that product. But instead of the cell undergoing exocytosis with all this packed material, the cell just explodes. Okay, so the cell dies. Okay. So this is a kind of delivery that I call is the most like dramatic type of exocrine delivery. So the cell fills up, and just before it delivers the product, it says, "Oh, holy," and explodes. Okay, so holy cow, holy shit! That they think explodes, the cell dies. All right, dramatic. And then you have this other version of delivery things that is called apocrine. Now, this cell is a bit dramatic, it accumulates the products, and instead of just getting the products to do the exocytosis, it bursts a piece of the cell, but the whole cell doesn't die. It just bursts a piece of it, a piece of the cytoplasm, and delivers the product, but the cell survives. Okay, so the one that just cuts a little piece out of it and survives, that's the apocrine. The one that explodes, the holocrine. Okay, the whole thing explodes, the holocrine thing. Okay. So examples of apocrine gland, you have mammary glands. So production of milk is that way. Examples of holocrine, you have sebaceous glands in your skin. Okay, and also keep in mind that sometimes the cells explode and they don't quite deliver it to the outside, and you have like clogging of the pore and the skin, and that's when you get those annoying pimples or even what those blackheads, whiteheads, something like that. Okay, so those are your holocrine glands. So here is the description, the picture showing the kind, each one of those kinds of cells. Okay, so this is the most common one. So this is a meroclin type of secretion. Then you have here your exocytosis of vesicles that get nicely dumped into this deposit at the apical region, and that goes to the duct and goes to the outside. An example of this is sweat gland. Okay. And here you have your holocrine type of swelling and bursting. Okay, so this is where the cell dies by exploding, and then this gets exported to the outside, gets exocytosed. I mean, not exocytosed, but dumped to the outside. It gets secreted here. An example of that was your mammary gland. And here you have your apocrine type of gland, and in which a part of the cell detaches, and this gets delivered to the outside here. Okay, so that's your apocrine type of gland. All right. So your test is going to cover up to this, so up to glands. So what I'll cover now is not going to be on your test, but this is going to be included for Unit 2 exam. Okay, do we have any questions? Everybody cool with that?
Yep, no questions.
All right, so now let's go into this second type of tissue, which is your connective tissue. Okay, there's a lot of stuff to know about connective tissue. Okay. First thing is that is the tissue that you have the most in the body. So most abundant and also the most varied type of tissue. You have a lot of variety, you have a lot of abundance. And you have to know how you're going to recognize what is a connective tissue. And where is it? It's everywhere, everywhere in the body, except in the brain and in the spinal cord. All right, so here, when you look at the brain and your spinal cord, you're not going to have that connective tissue. But that doesn't mean that the brain, the spinal cord are not surrounded by connective tissues. Okay, so yeah, like you look at the meninges, that's going to be a type of connective tissue. You look at the cerebral spinal fluid, yeah, that's another type of connective tissue. But the brain and the spinal cord themselves do not have connective tissues. Everywhere else in the body, you're going to find it. And what is making up the connective tissue? You're going to have cells, but not very packed. They're going to be like lonely cells here and there. You're going to have a lot of fibers, and then you're going to have a stuff between the cells and the fibers. And this stuff we call matrix. Okay. So what are here the major functions of connective tissues? You're going to use it for support, for getting stuff stuck together, a lot of support, and you're going to find it for protection, as well as insulation of the body, of the organs, okay? And you're going to say, what do you mean protection? Well, bones are connective tissue, cartilage is connective tissue, okay? And insulation, you're going to say, oh, fat, fat is a type of connective tissue, but it's kind of different than the rest of connective tissues. So we have some exceptions to the general rules of connective tissues. All right, so let's start looking here at the main classes of connective tissues. So first thing, you're going to have this thing that is called connective tissue proper. And it's kind of weird to imagine this connective tissue proper because at first it looks a bit disorganized and it's all over the body. And you can think of it as a mesh that is like a suit that goes all over the body under your skin. Okay, so it's like when you go to the supermarket and you buy onions and you see that the bag of onions that has all these like little fibers just holds the onions together. Those little fibers holding the onion, that's more like what connective tissue proper looks like. Okay. And then you're going to have cartilage. Of course, we are familiar with cartilage. There are different types of cartilage, right? You have cartilage in your ears. They're very flexible, like in the tip of your nose. And you have cartilage like in joints. There's also different types of cartilage, right? So cartilage is connective tissue. And then you have bones. Yeah, bones are very, very cool. And yeah, connective tissue. And blood is the only liquid type of connective tissue, but it's also considered as connective tissue. So now I got to figure out how you put all of those in a way that you can classify them as connective tissues. All right, so let's see here. What is it that those tissues do, right? They're going to support the body, they're going to protect the body, and they are going to make pathways, like meshy pathways for nerves and for blood vessels to reach organs, right? And besides all that, they also serve as highways for cells that are very important in immune defense. So immune system cells will travel in these connective tissue highways. Besides blood being a connective tissue, all of the cells of immune system are going to be traveling through the blood as well. So now here, characteristics of those connective tissues. As we mentioned, a lot of those are used for support, right? And what is it you're going to see here? You're going to find that you have cells that are not stuck to each other. They are lonely cells. Okay, so you're going to find like one cell here, one cell there. And when you look at those cells, you're going to see that, they barely communicate with each other. They like to be alone in a little lake of their own, in a little house that they build around themselves. Okay, so you have spares. You have cells that are not compacted like you see in epithelial tissue. They're not side by side holding hands. There's like one here, one there in little lagoons or little lakes spread around. And then you're going to have a lot of extracellular stuff. The extracellular stuff, that's what you call matrix. Okay, so you're going to have fibers and you're going to have proteins that are produced by this cell that is in this little lake, all right? And these cells are responsible for building all this matrix stuff that is around it, okay? So all these things that are in the middle here of the cells, there's also called the matrix, right? You're going to have fibers, and then you're going to have stuff that fills up in between the fibers. And this is what you call ground substance, right? So you have isolated cells, you have fibers, and you're going to have ground extracellular proteins that are also part of the fibers, and you're going to have ground substance, what fills up the spaces between the fibers and the cells. Okay. Here is another picture showing a tissue that you can easily identify as connective tissue, because when you look at it, you're going to see more stuff than cells. So that's the first clue that you're dealing with connective tissue. So you look around here, you're going to see, oh, fibers. A lot of these fibers are collagen, okay? And you look here and say, oh, I see one cell here, one cell there. I see a blood vessel right there, and that's a good idea that most connective tissues are very much vascularized. Of course, there is always one exception, which is the cartilage, but most connective tissues have a lot of blood vessels, okay? And then you look at here and say, okay, blood vessels, so that's definitely not epithelium. So blood vessels is telltale sign for connective tissue. I'm just gonna close the window here because this crazy dog is starting to bark. All right. So blood vessels, definitely not epithelial. Yeah, absolutely, go for connective tissue. And then you're going to see fibers. Yeah, telltale sign of connective tissue. But the basic clue that you're going to have here is that you have a lot of stuff between the cells. Cells are not packed, cells are isolated here and there, and you have stuff between the cells, right? So you look at this thing and you say, must be some kind of connective tissue. All right, so different categories here of connective tissues. First thing you're going to look for is independent cells. They're sparse, they're scattered, they're not holding hands, they're not stuck to each other. And then let me see here. You're going to have also connective tissues that are in these categories here. Okay, you have a proper, so that's the mesh, right? And you're going to have very strange type. The only fluid connective tissue that you have is really the blood and derivatives of blood. So it's going to be all in this category here. There's going to be blood, interstitial fluid, and lymph. And lymph is the liquid that comes out of the blood at the capillaries and is part of that interstitial fluid, but then it gets absorbed by your lymphatic vessels. So the stuff that goes to your lymphatic vessels, the liquid, you call that the lymph. So this is all part of your fluid or liquid connective tissue. Okay. And then you're going to have this type of connective tissue that is mainly supportive. So if you're going to support things in the body, that's going to be bone and it's going to be cartilage. Okay. So let's see here. So here's another picture showing these general properties and how to distinguish your connective tissue. So again, you have here fibers. Mainly, you're going to have collagen fibers, okay? And of course, you have your blood vessels here. You have cells that are isolated. Like you have your capillary here, and you're going to have a lot of stuff. This stuff is that matrix. All right, so common things about connective tissues. So there are three things that are true for all the connective tissues. All right. First thing is that they all came from the same original embryonic type of cells. So they all have the same embryonic origin, and that is in the mesenchyme. So mesenchyme cells that give rise to connective tissue. So what is that mesenchyme? So let's see here, because we're not really going to cover embryology. Okay, so I'm going to get a little pen here, and I'm going to say, okay, so here, when you draw your developing embryo here, you're going to have the outer part, that is your ectoderm, and you're going to have the middle part, that this part here in the middle, that is your mesenchyme. So that is your mesenchyme right there. So this outer part here is going to be the ectoderm. So that's going to give rise to your skin and nervous system, nervous tissue. So brain, spinal cord, skin, they all come from the ectoderm. So the middle part here is what we're interested in, the mesoderm, that you have mesenchyme cells. And then in the inside here, you have your endoderm, and that's going to be giving rise to organs. Okay, now it was 5:51. Let's take a 5 minutes break because I gotta go and murder a dog that is barking down here. Just kidding, I love dogs. All right, 5 minutes break, and let's be back here at 5:56, okay, to conclude this part. Okay, so let's make sure I put in the timer here. Be right back. Hey. Hey, Tom. Let me see. Thanks. We still have a little time for a break here. In the meantime, I'm back here, so if anybody wants to chat. Record this again. Okay, so we were talking here. Here, okay. So embryonic origin, they all come from the middle. So mesenchyme cells that gave rise to all of the connective tissues. Well, of course, you always have some exception, but your exception here is really the blood, okay? So blood came from another origin, like your endoderm. So other tissue, not the mesenchyme, but everything else came from the mesenchyme. All right. So this was their first important characteristic of connective tissues. Your second important characteristic is that they have a lot of blood vessels. They are highly vascularized, right? Well, of course, most of them, there is one exception, which is cartilage. So cartilage doesn't really have blood vessels, right? So cartilage is avascular. So all the other tissues do have blood vessels, all the other connective tissues. All right. And here is your third characteristic, that you have a lot of extracellular matrix in your connective tissue. All right. So the stuff that is in between the cells, that is your extracellular matrix. Okay. And then you're thinking like, well, what about blood? Blood is a connective tissue. What is the extracellular matrix of blood? Anyone?
Plasma.
Yeah, yeah. Plasma is your extracellular matrix of blood. Okay. And as usual, you always have one exception to the rules. And your exception here is going to be fat connective tissue, because fat cells, they're not going to really have that extracellular matrix. All right. So I don't think I have it written here. All right. So make sure you write here your exception to that rule, for extracellular matrix. So except fat tissue. So fat tissue is also considered connective tissue, but you don't really have extracellular matrix in fat. Okay. Again, what are important things that are going to distinguish the connective tissue? They're all coming from the mesenchyme, all right? And when you look here at your adult connective tissue, right, you're going to have those characteristics. So here is showing you your original cell that differentiated and is giving you all of 4 types of connective tissues. Okay. Again, remember, blood is really coming from a special type of connective tissue. So let's see what kind of cells that you're going to find here in connective tissue, right? So the first one, there is your non-specified type of stem-like cell, right? So this is your cell that did not differentiate yet and is part of your mesoderm, okay? So once the cell differentiates, what you're going to have? You're going to have these cells that are fibroblasts. They are very important at producing fibers for connective tissues. Then you have other cells, they are called mesothelial cells or endothelial cells, right? Those are also very important, derived from the mesenchyme, right? And these guys here, these guys are really cool for connective tissue cells. You're going to have chondroblasts, and chondrocytes. Those are going to give you cartilage. So every time you see chondro somewhere, those are related to cartilaginous tissues. Okay. And then you have this other guy here, osteoblast. Osteoblast is going to make your bones, right? So the cell differentiates, becomes osteoblast, and the osteoblast is going to sit inside a little space inside your bones, right? When the osteoblast becomes mature, it becomes an osteocyte. And same thing with chondroblast. Chondroblast is going to start to is a beginning stage of differentiation into the cartilaginous cell. When the cell differentiates, it becomes a chondrocyte, as we're going to see later. And then your last type here is your adipocyte. Remember, that's the guy that's going to make fat tissue. And then the fat tissue doesn't really have connective, doesn't really have matrix around it. So the fat cells are side by side, and they have these huge storage areas inside of them, right? They have these globules of fat that are like almost as big as the cell. And even if you look at the nucleus, you see that the nucleus gets squished to one side of the cell, and this droplet takes over most of the cellular space. Okay. So they're all coming from the original mesenchyme cell. Okay. Again, some of these slides are a bit repetitive, but just to make sure that you get the points across, right? So what you're going to find in the connective tissue, those 3 elements. Okay. So let's start looking at specific types of connective tissue. So here is an example of your areolar type of tissue. So what you're going to find that is right under your skin. So the areolar type of connective tissue is going to hold on to your epithelial cells. So it's going to anchor your epithelial cells. At the same time, if you look at it, you say, well, if I want to anchor my epithelial cells, I don't want this tissue to be very dense, like in tendons or ligaments. So the tissue has to be not too tough. It has to be resistant, but it has to stretch at the same time. Okay. So now you're going to look at this tissue and say, okay, what do I have there? I'm going to have fibers, but the fibers have to be resistant enough so that when you pull on my skin, it's not going to fall apart, right? So they're going to be dense fibers. You're going to have some dense fibers there. And when you look at this overall connective tissue, you're going to find isolated cells, Okay, so you're gonna have a cell here, a cell there. So you identify right away that it has to be connective. You're gonna have a lot of matrix in between, right? And then you look at these fibers, the arrangement of these fibers, and it's not something that is very regular. It's not something like on top of each other looking like little lines. They're all like a mesh of stuff. So you say, okay, it's a mesh of stuff, so it is irregular type of connective tissue. Right? So it is irregular, and you look at the amount of stuff or the amount of matrix that is between these fibers, and you're going to say the fibers are not stuck tightly on top of each other. It is irregular, and you have a lot of stuff in between them. So you're going to say it's kind of, the fibers are kind of loose in there. So they are irregular and they are loose, and you have some collagen fibers. They're scattered everywhere, but you cannot really say that they are really tight on top of each other. Okay, so irregular, loose connective tissue, and um, and this thing has to be resistant enough to hold on to a skin, right? So let's see how we're gonna identify this. Okay. This is the part, right? This is the part for your areolar type of connective tissue. And then you're going to say, why is it called areolar connective tissue? Well, since this is coming like right under the skin, when you think of in a situation like, if you're not a vegetarian, you eat chicken, when you get a chicken, piece like a supermarket package or something, and you lift the skin, that's the part right under your ectoderm that is easy to fill up with air. So this is the part of the connective tissue that if you separate the skin, this thing here is kind of the thing right under it. So it's easy to get air in there. That's why it's called areola, because we can get, airy right under the skin. Okay. So let's see here. What else I have here? Okay. So here is your areolar tissue. Okay. Where is it? Is everywhere under the skin. Okay. So it's like a suit under your skin. Okay. And is going to support your epithelial cells. All right. So your cells right under your epithelial cells, remember that's your basement membrane, right? So your basement membrane is part of your areolar tissue. Okay. And we just looked at the types of epithelial cells that are glands. So those are also going to be surrounded by loose areolar connective tissue. Okay. Okay, so the lamina propria is also a type of loose connective tissue that's going to be right under the areolar connective tissue. Okay. So let me see here. All right, so loose connective tissue, you're going to have fibers, but a lot of stuff in between the fibers, and it has to be kind of elastic. So now when you look at another type of connective tissue that you do not see a lot of stuff in between the fibers, okay, so this is going to be considered differently. It's not going to be loose, that's going to be dense. When you have a lot of fibers that are packed together, so you're going to call that dense connective tissue. Now you're going to look at the arrangement of these fibers, and you're going to say, is it just thrown in there like a mesh of stuff, or is it nicely organized one on top of each other, like hair? No, you're going to say, no, this is just dumped in there. So you're going to say that this is irregular, but is very much packed together. So you're going to say is irregular, but is dense type of connective tissue. Okay. Now, what is this tissue good for? Well, basically, it is going to resist tearing. Okay, so it's going to make the fabric strong. And I say, well, but under the skin, didn't we say it's areolar tissue? Yeah, but right after the areolar tissue, you're gonna have this dense irregular type of connective tissue. Okay, so areolar tissue is going to be close to the surface here, close to the epithelial layer. And right after that, you're going to have dense, irregular connective tissue. Now, you need to compare that with dense, regular connective tissue. So that's your next picture here. Now, this is very easy to identify. You have fibers that are running alongside each other, and those fibers are mainly a strong type of collagen. Okay, so collagen fibers packed on top of each other, and not a lot of matrix between those cells. Okay, so you have a cell here, a cell there, a lot of fiber, and not a lot of matrix. When you look at something like this, you're going to say this gives you two-dimensional, or even depending on the tissue, even one-dimension type of strength. So this is packed with a type of collagen for strength and support. So that's a typical type of tissue that you find in ligaments and tendons. Okay, then later on you're going to see what's the difference between ligament and tendon. They basically look the same, but a ligament connects bone to bone, and then a tendon is going to connect muscle to bone. But the arrangement of the fibers and the composition of the fibers, those are basically the same. Okay. Okay, so here get ready because you're going to have another question. And yeah, it's quite easy here. And everybody should get this one right. Which of the following is the main embryonic origin of connective tissue? Okay, let's start the timer.
Okay, 30 seconds. Twenty seconds. 10. 3, 2, 1. All right. What is the answer? A.
Hey, yeah, mesoderm. I hope that nobody else answered anything else.
We got 10% answered B.
Endoderm, that's the inside. So mesoderm is in the middle. That gives rise to connective tissue. Endoderm is going to give rise to organs. Okay. All right. So in this picture here, we're going to see where is it, again, where is it in the body? Aside, it's found everywhere in the body, but there are some types of connective tissues that are quite easy to spot because they do give support and boundaries to organs, right? So you look here, and I know this thing looks like an eye, but it's not an eye. I believe this is actually a testy, right? So here on the outside, you're going to find this capsule that is, in the case of the testis, is a quite thick capsule and is very resistant to any type of tearing. Don't try to break any of those capsules, I mean, all right. So my mind traveled here. So this type of capsule is important to keep whatever is inside of this organ separated from whatever is outside. So whatever is in here is very much isolated inside of that organ. Okay, so this type of capsule is important for this type of separation when you look at organs like the eye or the testes. Those are what you call immune privilege organ. So what goes on inside of these organs is not going to be very much exposed to cells of your immune system, okay? Because cells of your immune system would be able to destroy cells that are developing inside of those organs, okay, especially in the case of the testes. So this capsule forms this protective, tough outer boundary that is, of course, very important for organ function. Okay. So here is where you see a type of organ that not only you have the capsule, okay, so this is the outer capsule, but also you have protrusions of the capsule that goes to the inside of the organ, and you call those septa. So things that are dividing, septum, they're dividing things here and there. If it's only one of them is a septum, if it is several of them, you call them septa. So those are the types of dense, irregular connective tissues that are protecting and subdividing the organs. So here we see that the outside, there's not shown here, but the capsule and the septa, that is all part of the stroma, right? So stroma is supporting connective tissue. Okay, so we have encapsulating and supporting connective tissue. And this is mainly for not the function of the organ, but just to keep it together, okay? If you look at the part of the organ that actually has the function, you call that parenchyma. Okay, so parenchyma is the part of the organ that has function, and then stroma is a supportive connective tissue that keeps the organ, holds the organ together. And then you have the capsule and the septa that will encapsulate and subdivide the organ. So this in just in general terms. So now let's see what are the elements that are making up the connective tissue. So we see that many of them are made up of those fibers, like as we mentioned. So there are several types of fibers. The first one is collagen. Again, collagen is not just one type of protein. You have many, many types of collagen. You have from the toughest types that are actually, type 1 is the toughest type of collagen, and up to, I don't know, 12 or so. And the higher the number, the more flexible the collagen, right? So collagen is really the strongest and most abundant type, right? Most abundant type of protein that we have in the body, right? So this is your collagen right there. And we have mentioned that before as well. Type 1 collagen is even stronger than a steel rod, right? It's a steel cable. Then you have these other fibers that are very flexible, and easily enough, you call them elastic fibers. So those are thin and they're very stretchy, like a rubber band. Those are your elastic fibers. And then besides elastic fibers, you have this other type that is called reticular fibers. So those are thin, they're short, and you usually see like a mesh of them. So they're fine and short and highly branched type of collagenous fiber, but it's not collagen. Okay, the chemistry of reticular fibers is different than the chemistry of collagen fibers. And those are intended to actually give some kind of flexibility to the tissue, but not too much elasticity. So it's flexibility so the tissue won't break, but not too much elasticity. That's the job of elastic fibers. And we're going to see more examples of those. Okay. Okay. So here, the types of fibers that are produced by these cells that are called fibroblasts. So fibroblasts are going to produce fibers, right? So they give origin, like blast, give origin to fibers. So fibroblasts are going to produce these three types of fibers. Here we have collagen, reticular, and elastic, okay? Again, oh, look at this. Reticular fibers, they actually fall under a category of type of collagen. So here's a type 3 collagen. That is a type that is not too tough and is not too flexible, right? So type 1 is really, really tough. And then type 7 is a lot more flexible. Type 3 is, closer to type 1. So it's basically supportive, but not too flexible. So what are the cells producing? Those are your fibroblasts. So here you see type of collagen fibers that is more to type 1 and 2. And then here you see these reticular type of fibers, or it could even have some elastic type of fibers showing this in this mesh of stuff. Oh, and I just look at my time and I'm blowing up the time again. Yeah, there are just a few slides left here, but I'm not going to rush through these last slides. I'm going to stop right here. And I'll say, okay, this is it for this class. I'm going to hang around and, answer some questions if you do have questions.